Well, hello. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar, Differential Privacy and the 2020 Census. I'm Wendy Underhill with the National Conference of State Legislatures. Differential privacy might be seen as an in-the-weeds topic by many, but we decided to learn more about it because it has a direct link to the usability of census data. And we all know that legislatures, and states generally, rely on census data for a lot of things, particularly for redistricting and for the distribution of federal funds. I'll set the stage by saying that every decade, the census does things a little differently than the cycle before. This decade, one change is in how the Bureau plans to protect confidentiality, and that's through this new system called differential privacy. So we've invited experts today to educate all of us on what is differential privacy and how it may impact data usability at the state level. I did have a conversation earlier this week with Denise Ross from Georgetown about why this matters. I thought her quote to me was as good as any on why this is important. She said, "More accuracy inherently means less privacy. From a redistricting perspective, we may want more accuracy on the block level data. However, that additional quality also would mean less privacy, so that, for example, a People Finder website could consume census data and combine it with private sector data to make it easier for an abuser to find a domestic violence survivor or a stalker to track down a victim." That's the end of the quote. But in other words, there are competing values here, privacy and usability, and we all want both of those things. In addition to learning about this push and pull, NCSL does hope, based on this webinar, to gather from you or from your states any feedback you may have on differential privacy and what it might mean for your own purposes. I know the Census Bureau staff want to get that feedback too, because all of its decisions on how to implement this new procedure are not yet finalized. So now's the time to give the Bureau your priorities. And at the end of the webinar, I'll give the feedback email to you so you can send in some comments. Before we get going, here are a few housekeeping matters. First, this is a 60-minute webinar. It is being recorded and will be made available online within a few days on NCSL's website. At the very end, you'll be redirected to a very short survey on other topics you'd like to see NCSL offer in future webinars. A PDF of these slides and of additional resources are posted in a tab labeled Resources, which you will find above the presentation itself. Feel free to download these at any point. Speakers' bios can be found in the tab labeled Speakers. And during the presentation, we're happy to have you ask questions at any point by typing them into the chat box on the bottom left-hand side. I'm not sure which side of your screen. Right now, if you could all just feel free to type in your name or your state or anything else you'd like us to know now so that we can be sure that that chat box is working for you. Let's see, what have we got in there? I see, yes, Liz, great. Okay, so we've got some folks coming along, great. And we will respond to questions and comments at the end, and that'll be about in 45 minutes. And lastly, if you are having any technical difficulties, please send us a message in the chat box. Our operator will reply to you privately and help to resolve that. Oh, good, this is fun. People are indeed doing so. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. In short, we're going to start with Michael Hawes, who is the Senior Advisor for Data Access and Privacy at the U.S. Census Bureau. He is responsible for outreach and engagement with the Census Bureau's data users on issues relating to the impact of privacy protection on the accessibility and usability of census data. And I'll mention here, too, that NCSL and the census staff have a long-standing relationship, and we very much appreciate their willingness to work with us really throughout the decade so that their products can meet states' needs. So thank you to you, Michael, and thank you to James Whitehorn as well. Next up, we'll hear from Jerry Howe. He has worked for Utah's nonpartisan Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel for 28 years and is currently the statewide initiatives manager for the Utah legislature. He also is the legislative liaison for the legislature with the Census Bureau, and he supervises the state's redistricting committee staff. NCSL benefits from his expertise whenever we're doing programming on redistricting and census-related issues. So thanks for being here today, Jerry. And then we'll hear from Cindy DeCrone, who is a senior demographer at the Colorado State Demography Office. This is the primary state agency in Colorado for demographic information, and the office representing state and local concerns that relate to the census. Cindy has over 25 years of experience analyzing population and economic trends for the U.S. and for Colorado. And Cindy, thank you for coming out to our office today to be here and present while we do this. With that, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. Today I'm going to share with you some of the exciting developments that the Census Bureau is making to protect privacy for the 2020 Decennial Census. Though Census Day is still officially 27 days away, census takers are already out in the field, with the first enumeration of the 2020 census having started just a few weeks ago in the remote Alaska Native village of Tooksuk Bay. As we embark on this massive operation to enumerate all approximately 329 million individuals in the U.S., it's helpful to understand the importance and the challenges of protecting the confidentiality of that information. Some of you have been following our work on differential privacy for a while others may be new to the issue. So I'm going to start by giving a brief explanation of what differential privacy is and why we're adopting it for the 2020 census. Then I will update you on our progress over the last several months and explain what we are currently doing to improve the system. Quick disclaimer, any opinions and viewpoints expressed today are entirely my own and do not necessarily represent the opinions or viewpoints of the U.S. Census Bureau. The Census Bureau's commitment to privacy and confidentiality is critical to our ability to produce high-quality statistics about the nation's people and economy. Protecting the privacy of our respondents and the confidentiality of their data is both a legal requirement and a core element of our institutional culture. The challenge we face is that we collect all this information in order to fulfill our mission to produce quality statistics about the nation. Information tabulated from the decennial census is used for a wide array of purposes. As you all know, census data is used to apportion seats in the House of Representatives, to draw district boundaries for federal, state, and local elections, and to distribute over $675 billion each year. But census data are also routinely used for critical decision-making at all levels of government, and they enable policymakers, businesses, analysts, and researchers across the country to measure and assess trends about who we are and where we're going as a society. Supporting these myriad data uses requires publishing an enormous amount of statistics and tables, often at very fine levels of granularity. Unfortunately, we know that every time you publish any statistic calculated from a confidential data source, you're going to reveal or leak a tiny bit of private information in the process. In 2003, in what later became known as the database reconstruction theorem, Danur and Nassim demonstrated that if you release too many statistics at too high a degree of accuracy, you'll eventually reveal the entire underlying confidential data source. This challenge is even greater when you consider the privacy threats that we face today. They say that nothing on the internet ever goes away, and the same can be said for data once it's gone out into the wild. Over the past 20 to 30 years, we've seen a massive proliferation of data that could potentially be used to re-identify individuals in our statistical data products. Data about us are collected all the time by the companies we interact with, by data brokers, and through social media. Not to mention the trove of personal information available on the dark web as a result of the countless data breaches over the years. These data could be used in an attempt to pick out specific individuals in the data that we publish. Meanwhile, technology has also improved. Computers can easily perform the complex matching algorithms necessary to leverage that external data in order to re-identify individuals. These parallel trends are not abstract concerns. They represent real, concrete threats to protecting confidentiality that need to be addressed. Over the past century, the Census Bureau has been a world leader in the design and implementation of statistical methods to safeguard privacy in public data releases. As new privacy threats have been identified over the years, the Census Bureau has worked diligently to improve our statistical safeguards to mitigate those threats. Our adoption of formal privacy for the 2020 census is merely the latest step in a long history of innovation and continuous improvement to our privacy protections, and a necessary one to counter the 21st century privacy threats posed by this proliferation of external data and more powerful algorithms that make re-identification of individuals ever easier. There's a common misperception that aggregating data is sufficient to protect privacy. While that may have once been the case and may still be true for some limited data releases, it's not sufficient to protect privacy in large-scale statistical data products. In fact, aggregate tabular data can often be thought of like a giant game of Sudoku. With Sudoku, if you have enough numbers pre-populated into the grid, there is one and only one solution to the puzzle. When you publish enough data tables, eventually there is one and only one set of individual level records that could have yielded those published tabular results. While it might have seemed unthinkable a decade ago, computer algorithms can now perform these reconstructions of individual level records from aggregate tabular data quite easily. Let's look at an example. Imagine that you collected some basic demographics about the 7 people who live on a particular block. You then publish some aggregate descriptive statistics about those people. How many were female? How many were black? What's the median age of married individuals, etc. Well, with those basic aggregate statistics, it's a trivial matter to solve for the only set of individual level records that could have yielded those results. I say trivial and I really mean it. In fact, it took a 2013 MacBook Pro a grand total of 0.2 seconds to reconstruct these data. Our would-be attacker now has individual level records for everyone on the block, but can she actually re-identify any of them? Well, it turns out this is also a relatively trivial exercise. While the reconstructed records did not have individuals' names, they did have a number of pseudo-identifiers that can be used to link to an outside data source that does have names. In this particular example, the attacker can use age and sex to match the reconstructed records to third-party data, say, for example, voter registration lists for that block. Now it's easy to attach a name to the records, and you've just learned Jane, Joe, and John's race and relationship status. And reconstruction and re-identification are not just theoretical possibilities. There have been many notable cases of re-identification of supposedly de-identified data over the years. Here are just a few of them. With the risks of reconstruction and re-identification in mind, and the knowledge that these types of attacks are getting easier and easier as computers improve and external data about us increases, the Census Bureau decided to conduct an experiment to see how vulnerable the decennial census is to this type of attack. Remember when I said before that every release of a calculation or tabulation derived from a confidential data source leaks a tiny bit of private information? Well, the 2010 census collected a handful of attributes for the approximately 309 million people in the US, for a total of about 1.9 billion confidential data points. Yet the 2010 census data products released over 150 billion aggregate statistics derived from those data. We wanted to see if that was enough to reconstruct the individual level records. The answer was an emphatic yes. In fact, using only a small portion of the 2010 public data products, Census Bureau researchers were able to accurately reconstruct individual level data for all 6 million inhabited blocks in the US. Moreover, we were able to reconstruct detailed individual level information, including sex, age to within a year, race, and ethnicity for 71% of the entire US population. Linking these reconstructed records to commercially available data from the period, we were then able to confirm accurate re-identifications on all variables for 52 million individuals. It should go without saying that the results of these reconstruction and re-identification experiments were a real eye-opener to us. Recognizing the growing threat posed by the proliferation of external data sources and the increasingly powerful algorithms that can perform these reconstructions, the Census Bureau recognized that our traditional approaches to protecting privacy in our public data products are increasingly insufficient. So to meet our continuing obligation to safeguard respondent information, the Census Bureau is committed to modernizing our approach to privacy protection, and we've adopted differential privacy for the 2020 census. Differential privacy, also known as formal privacy, is a framework for quantifying the precise amount of privacy risk for all calculations, tables, and data products that you publish, no matter what third-party data is available to use in a re-identification attack, now or at any point in the future. Said slightly differently, formal privacy as an approach allows you to precisely measure and mitigate the leakage of private information in your published statistics. By quantifying that risk, known in the DP literature as the sensitivity of the calculation or query, differential privacy allows us to mitigate that risk to an acceptable level by injecting precisely calibrated amounts of statistically neutral noise to those calculations. But what constitutes an acceptable level of privacy? Well, the only way to absolutely eliminate all risk of re-identification in our data products would be to never publish any usable data at all. Clearly, as the nation's leading provider of quality statistics, that isn't a viable option. So policymakers must find the optimal balance wherein we provide data that are sufficiently accurate for their intended uses, while also being sufficiently noisy to meet our legal and ethical obligations to safeguard the data. And this is ultimately a policy decision. That said, once you identify that point on the spectrum where the data are both accurate enough and sufficiently protected, that point becomes known as your privacy loss budget. And you'll see this represented by the Greek letter epsilon quite frequently. Much like a monetary budget, the lower your privacy loss budget, the less privacy you're willing to give up. An epsilon of 0 would be the world of perfect privacy, but completely useless data. An epsilon of infinity would be the world of perfect data, but no privacy protections at all. There are a lot of differential privacy naysayers who say that DP will destroy the usability of data compared to traditional privacy protection techniques. Let me be clear that when you're comparing differential privacy with traditional disclosure avoidance techniques, neither approach is inherently better than the other from the perspective of data accuracy. It all depends on their implementation and their parameters. I've seen some differential privacy uses that result in highly accurate data when they are well designed and have a sufficiently high privacy loss budget. And I've seen some implementations of traditional techniques that result in terrible data quality when they're poorly designed or have particularly high swap rates or cell suppression thresholds. Where differential privacy and traditional methods do substantially differ is on the privacy front. Formal privacy provides quantifiable and future-proof guarantees that traditional methods simply cannot. So what does all this mean for the 2020 decennial census? Well, for starters, let me be absolutely clear that the Census Bureau's adoption of formal privacy will not alter our constitutional mandate to apportion seats for the House of Representatives using the actual enumeration of state populations. The remaining data products, including the PL 94-171 redistricting data, will have privacy protections applied, as they have in prior censuses. Only this time, the noise will come from differential privacy rather than from the record swapping mechanism that we used in the past. The switch to differential privacy does require us to reevaluate the quantity of the statistics and tables that we'll be releasing, as each additional statistic or table uses up a fraction of that privacy loss budget. Consequently, the proposed suite of 2020 census data products will be somewhat different than in past decades. And if you want to learn more about these differences, there'll be a link at the end of my presentation, or you can just search 2020 census data products on the census.gov website. Over the past 6 months, we've been hard at work getting the Disclosure Avoidance System, or DAS, ready for its production run in 2021. Our priorities during the fall were to get the system running at the full scale of the 2020 census, to demonstrate that the system can effectively protect privacy at scale, and to set the stage for the next phase of the system's development by enabling our data users to evaluate the accuracy and fitness for use of the resulting data. These efforts were largely successful, but we still have much to do over the coming year. The engagement and efforts of our data users have been invaluable in helping us to identify and prioritize these improvements that still need to be made. To get that data user feedback that was necessary to optimize the system for the priority use cases, we worked with the Harvard Data Science Review to host a symposium back in October, where 3 prestigious teams of data users presented their assessments of data produced by running the now public 1940 census through an earlier version of the DAS and comparing the results. And in December, the Committee on National Statistics of the National Academy of Sciences convened a 2-day workshop at which data users from a wide variety of fields and disciplines presented their findings and their evaluations of the 2010 demonstration data products. Some of these findings echoed conclusions drawn by our own internal evaluations of the data, Other findings were new to us and have already started informing the development work to improve the design and optimization of our disclosure avoidance system. If you're interested in seeing the results from these data user assessments, I encourage you to visit the CNSTAT website. They have videos and the slide decks for all the presentations. I'd also like to extend my sincere appreciation to all of the individuals that participated in the workshop. The DAS is still a work in progress, and the analyses and findings that were presented at the workshop are helping us to make the improvements necessary to ensure that the data products we will be producing in 2021 will meet our data users' needs. One of the largest issues we've identified, and that was discussed at length in the workshop, is the error resulting from the post-processing that occurs within the algorithm. There are two sources of noise in the disclosure avoidance system. There's the statistically neutral noise that results from differential privacy, and then there's the additional noise that results from the optimizations that the algorithm performs to convert that now private noisy data into the things that look like statistics, the non-negative integer values that we're used to in census data products. In general, this post-processing error tends to be much larger than the differential privacy error. And while the noise resulting from differential privacy is statistically unbiased, the post-processing error does have some notable biases, including a positive bias in small counts and a downward bias for large counts, effectively moving people from cities to less populous areas in the data. To address these issues, we're currently exploring two very promising solutions. We're looking at incorporating legal and political geographies into the system's geographic spine, and we're adopting a multi-phase approach to that post-processing. Prior iterations of the DAS performed the post-processing along a central geographic spine, from nation to state to county to tract to block group to block. While these geographies are intuitive from the data collection vantage point, they're largely statistical constructs and don't reflect the geographies that our data users are particularly interested in measuring. Our new approach is to modify the post-processing geographic hierarchies to include legal and political entities, including cities, towns, incorporated places, and American Indian and Alaska Native legal geographies. This strategy should significantly improve the accuracy of the data for those entities, as it allows for direct measurement of these characteristics of interest, and it provides these legal and political entities with their own dedicated share of the privacy loss budget. The other promising solution that we're developing is to switch to a multi-phase approach to post-processing. The biggest distortions we saw in the demonstration products occurred because the DAS has to deal and has trouble dealing with large numbers of empty cells in the histogram. That is, at the block level, you're not going to have people that represent every possible combination of every possible attribute. So the tally for that combination would be 0. Our proposed solution is to run the DAS in a series of passes. In the first pass, we would just compute total population and group quarters populations down to the block level. Then we would run the system again to generate the PL94 redistricting data. But we would constrain that second pass to the population counts that were determined in the previous pass. Then we would do the same to generate the roughly 3 million statistics necessary for our population estimates program and for most of the demographic analyses, constrained to the values of the PL file. And then and only then would we run the remainder of the statistics necessary to complete the DHC products that are now constrained to the values obtained in the third pass. Doing this will allow each pass to inherit the accuracy of the prior passes and help to ensure that the major distortions that we observed in the demonstration products are eliminated. But as they say, the proof is in the pudding. We don't want you to just take our word that we're resolving these issues. So we're developing a set of objective metrics based on the priority use cases and the stakeholder feedback that we've received. These metrics will allow us to regularly report out on the improvements we're making to the system and will enable our data users to continue evaluating and informing the remaining work as we continue to improve the system over the rest of the calendar year. So in conclusion, the modernization of our disclosure avoidance methods for the 2020 decennial census has not been an easy undertaking, but the growing vulnerabilities of traditional disclosure avoidance methods mean that we needed to adopt a 21st century solution to counter these 21st century threats. The design and optimization of our disclosure avoidance system is still ongoing and will continue over the coming year. If you want to learn more about this initiative, or if you want to stay informed about design improvements to the algorithm, please check out our Disclosure Avoidance in the 2020 Census page at the link here. And if you'd like to get under the hood of the algorithm, so to speak, you can find a link to our system's code on that page too. We'd love to hear from you if any of you have suggestions for improvements. Now I'll turn things back over to Wendy. Thank you so very much.
That was great, Michael. Thank you very much. If we can still hear your voice, I'd like to ask, when is it that you need to have input from any states or individual observers?
So we are, as I said, improvements to the algorithm are going to be occurring over the remainder of the calendar year. We will be accepting feedback through fall, though earlier is better, as we're operating on, those of you who know the software development cycle, we're operating on an agile process, so we're running like month-long sprints. So the earlier we get feedback, the greater the likelihood we can put it into effect in one of the early sprints and actually act on it. So for the most actionable feedback, we'd say earlier, but we'll accept feedback through the fall.
Okay, I like that answer, as soon as we can get information back. And I think I have the right email address to send information. It's DCMD2010, like 2010, demonstration, data, products @census.gov. So I'll say that again at the end as well. Jerry, are you ready? Let's turn it over to Jerry Howe.
Thank you, Wendy. Good job, Michael. Good day, everyone. Let me start with special thanks to Wendy and her staff for sponsoring this webinar, and to Michael, great job getting the hay down to where the calves can get to it. I appreciate that very much. I've learned a lot from Michael's presentation. My presentation today will last about 10 minutes. During that time, I want to make 4 general observations about differential privacy, and then I will explain what Utah learned when we compared the demonstration products provided by the U.S. Census Bureau to our 2010 census data. First, our observations about differential privacy. As Michael said, protecting the information of census respondents is important, perhaps even critical, to the long-term viability of the census. One can only imagine what would happen to the future response rate of the census if some sophisticated data miner actually gained access to all of the personally identifiable information of everyone who responded to the census and sold it to the highest bidder. For this reason, the Census Bureau deserves a shout-out for protecting our privacy. Having made this important acknowledgement, let's not neglect the equally important duty the census has to provide the states with a complete and accurate enumeration. An accurate enumeration is not only necessary for congressional reapportionment, which I've learned today will be 100% accurate, but it's also necessary for local, legislative, and congressional redistricting, which is at issue under the use of differential privacy. So, as I understand it, differential privacy is simply a statistical method or technique that, and here you can insert a variety of creative euphemisms like scramble, jigger, or insert noise into the census data at the census block level so as to protect privacy at the expense of an accurate enumeration. The bottom line, in 2020, the Census Bureau will report intentionally falsified enumerations at the census block level. I know that stating it this way may cause some of our hearts to skip a beat, but to be fair, this isn't new. The Census Bureau has been falsifying data for decades, but never to this degree, and also for a very good reason. We know why they're doing it, they're honest about doing it, and moreover, we understand that it has to be done. The challenge is to find an acceptable balance between reporting a complete and accurate enumeration with protecting the personally identifiable information of respondents. Utah's conclusion after we've applied the demonstration data is that we're not quite there yet, and let me show you why. So I think this might be a good time to mention that the math of differential privacy is complicated. So if an epsilon's effect on the privacy deficit is giving anybody fits, I'm here to tell you not to get discouraged. You don't have to go all the way down the mathematical rabbit hole to understand what differential privacy does to your data. I think it's more important that you are able to use the demonstration products to compare your state's 2010 data than it is to be able to describe the privacy epsilon to a room of statisticians. There's a time and a place for the mathematics, so don't get me wrong. But first, I think states must know what the demonstration products say about differential privacy and how that differential privacy affects your state's data. So in Utah, we use the demonstration products provided by the census. And by the way, Michael, we thank you very much for both providing those products and encouraging the states to use these products. So Utah created some maps and tables using the legislative and congressional districts and our counties and our municipalities, which are our cities and towns. And we were surprised to observe what the demonstration products revealed. So what I'd like to do is to move ahead to, let me skip here to this slide right here. This is with our municipalities. These two slides show cities that represent about 85% of our state's population along the I-15 corridor from Springville and Spanish Fork in the south to North Ogden and Pleasant View in the north. All of this area could be considered urban. We noticed that most of these cities are some shade of blue, which means that these cities are losing population under differential privacy. We list every city in the table, and I'll move to the table in just a moment. You can see these blue cities, and everything that's a shade of blue is losing population. And we see a few of them with red. There's very little in the cities. And we'll show why that happens here in just a moment. But as we move to the tables, take a look at our little city of Tabiona with a population of 171. It loses 92 people, roughly 53.8%. Our town of Alta, 119 people, loses 60 people for a loss of 50%, and it goes on. I'll be honest, these numbers slapped us upside the head. We did not see this coming. We don't believe that any privacy technique employed by the census has ever resulted in variances anything close to what we're seeing here. Upon closer inspection, we noticed that differential privacy moved about 15,000 people from our cities and towns. The only places these people could have ended up is in unincorporated areas of our counties. 15,000 people from cities to the unincorporated areas of counties, and this represents what Michael referred to as this tendency in the post-processing errors to move people from urban areas to rural areas. So under the differential privacy, and we can take a look at all of these cities as they go through, you can see how these numbers affect us. And we're happy to provide this information for everybody to review later because there's a lot of data here. But let me go to the very end here where you can see the cities that received the most populations, and you can see these percentages in gains right here. A couple of cities, Ophir increased 121%, and Schofield over 200% of an increase. So the balance here is that 2 of our cities lost more than 50% of their total population. 20 cities experienced more than a 20% loss. 43 of our cities experienced a loss of more than 10%, and 1 city gained more than 200% of its population. With deviations this large, we are concerned for the efficacy of local elections in these cities and within the hundreds of our independent local service districts. These numbers indicate a significant burden on our local redistricting efforts in the state. So what impact do these numbers have on our legislative districts? Let me go back to our House districts. As you can see from this slide, the small districts here are all listed in some form of blue, which indicates that they are losing population. And if there's some form of red, those are gaining populations. In terms of our tables, you can see these are Senate districts. You can see the population shifts. We have the same indication here on our House side. The Senate ranges are not as significant as our House, but you can see that we lose from 0.6% to up to 0.8%, which is a overall deviation of about 1.5%. As we look at our House, it's even more dramatic. With all of these small districts that you can see in the center of the state along the I-15 corridor where most of our population is, you can see that these districts are losing population, and out in our rural areas you can see where the population is being gained. So here are the tables. The percentage changes from a negative 1.25%, and they move to a high of a gain of 2.3%. So an overall range is roughly 3.25%, or about 3.5% actually. So again, under the city analysis, the House and the House districts, like our cities, indicates that the demonstration products, the differential privacy, transfer significant population from rural areas to urban areas. We see the same thing in our county maps, but the range is smaller. So in our counties, we have about a 0.14% decrease in our urban counties to a high of 13% population gain in a small rural county. And I can pull up that slide here in just a moment. I think it's that one. So if you can read that, you've got Davis County, which is where I live. It's a populated county. It's about the third fastest growing county in our state. We lose about 0.14% of our population, and out here in Daggett County, they gained 13% of their population in this county. At the state level, we know that the enumeration is going to be 100% accurate for reapportionment purposes, but as the demonstration products demonstrate, the accuracy of the enumeration decreases as the geographical area gets smaller. So as the accuracy suffers just a little bit at the congressional and the county and the Senate district level, it gets worse at the House level and worse still at the city level. To state that another way, the more census blocks there are within a geographical unit, the less variances or deviations we seem to experience. The opposite is also true. As a consequence, small rural cities and towns experience these greatest variances, which we demonstrated with the city slides. In conclusion, differential privacy shifts populations from urban areas to our rural areas. Small geographical areas such as our cities and our House districts are affected more than the larger geographical areas like we see in our congressional or Senate districts. These population shifts have implications for redistricting, but they also have other implications. Indeed, we're currently trying to assess what impact these shifts will have on federal funding and state revenue sharing schemes in our state statutes. Moreover, these population shifts will alter basic demographic information in rural and urban areas, within cities, and within unincorporated areas of counties. Cindy will, after me, will discuss these implications with respect to conducting policy analysis. But as a final word, I hope it's clear that everyone needs to use these demonstration products that are so kindly provided by the Census Bureau to compare differential privacy infused data with our state's 2010 data. I know of no other way to determine how differential privacy will impact your state data than by making this comparison. And the good news is we can make these comparisons without having to know every mathematical nuance of differential privacy, privacy loss budgets, disclosure avoidance, or epsilons being 0 to infinity. We can just make these comparisons, do this kind of analysis, and see how they're affected, and then we can work with the census to correct some of these, I think, some of these larger variances. That, Wendy, concludes my presentation.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jerry. I really appreciate what Utah has done. And I'll just say to all of you from other states, if your state has done an analysis like Utah's, we would love to see it. I know the Census Bureau would like to see it too. And if you haven't yet done it, I think Jerry's saying that it's not that hard to do it. Jerry, can I put you on the spot and ask if you could help other states if they need some assistance on how to get started with that?
We absolutely can do that. In fact, we've anticipated that. We've got a real good technical support staff with Joseph Wade. He can really do a lot with data, and if anybody's interested in this or having trouble doing it, please contact us and we'll help you get through it.
Absolutely, thank you. Then I also want to let you know, Jerry, and everyone else, that your letter and a perhaps easier to see set of slides is in the resource box, so that people can go through it at their leisure slowly. And also that a number of people have been helpful about putting demonstration product links into the chat box. So there's both the one from the census, and apparently a couple of universities or other places have made it even easier to use. So go there for that kind of information. Are you ready, Cindy?
I'm ready.
Okay, go for it.
And so thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Michael. And thank you very much, Jerry, for everything you've mentioned today. So this afternoon, I get to continue by sharing a few of the results from our review in Colorado of the demonstration data and the implications for policy analysis. So the importance of today's presentation is Michael mentioned the Bureau is currently revising the post-processing methodology, including revising geographical hierarchy, as well as making decisions on where the emphasis on accuracy should be. And I think it is essential that these decisions involve a broader base of user communities in a meaningful way. And so everyone listening in today is one of those important users. And so just to echo what Jerry said before, our goals today are to share what we've learned so far and to assist you in providing feedback and informed evaluation of the metrics and the decisions that have been and will continue to be made by the Bureau in the context of your own use cases. So certainly within Colorado, echoing Jerry's comments as well, what we saw in terms of the total population was the size of geography impact and then that urban to rural bias. We also noted several unreasonable results in household sizes that were less than one, families with children with no adults, population where there were no housing units, occupied housing units with no people, and then 100% occupancy. And so there was definitely a significant issue with regard to the separation of that relationship between the housing units and the population. So on this next slide, we have a map of household size, a difference between what was released in the 2010 census and then the DP file for Colorado. And so again, it is this sort of disconnected relationship between the population and occupied housing units. Household size is one of the most important variables in producing population estimates, which are the population totals that we have between decennial census years. So it's critical in understanding how household composition has changed over the last decade as well. So this map just shows those differences in household sizes. The darkest counties had the largest differences. The interesting thing about this is this was inconsistent with the population changes that we saw overall, and that the Front Range of Colorado, where most of the population lives, is right down the center, where we see some of the larger household sizes, but again, that was where the population was lower than what we expected. So just some inconsistent results that we saw, but certainly for legislators and policy analysts, understanding change in the size and the composition of households is so important for understanding the well-being of households, as well as many housing-related issues and policies. So in terms of households, when we looked into it for Colorado, looking at the smallest, some of the smaller counties in Colorado, less than 5,000 in terms of total population, this represented 22% of all of Colorado's counties. The DP households were 52% higher than what was released in 2010, and that was if we aggregated all of them. They were 80% higher on average by county. Household sizes declined from 2.2 to 1.5, which were significant differences. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, as we got to larger populations, so the majority of Colorado's counties are between 5,000 and 20,000 people, we were a difference of 16%, and then the household size declined from 2.3 to 2.0. And as we got larger, again, those differences declined a little bit. We really kept most of our analyses at the county level, just given the significant differences that we saw at the county level. But we did peak at the block level in terms of households, and Colorado has 200,000 blocks. 18,700 had more occupied housing units than people. 11,000 had occupied housing units, but zero population. And certainly, Again, with household type and temporal changes, we wanted to take a look at just the number of households with children. An aging population typically results in fewer households with children and more households without children. This makes sense. As our kids grow up, they move out. And so Colorado has been aging, as well as most of the United States. But when we look at that change in the number of households with children, using the data as released in 2010 from the SF file, we saw 43 counties decline in the number of households with children, 20 increased, and only one increase. You know, the largest increase was 53% in a high-growth county, which makes sense because they tend to attract young adults as migrants, and so the households with children being larger there. And so it was just in line with what we would have expected in terms of an aging population. With the DP data, 11 counties declined and 50 counties increased, 7 of which were greater than 100%. So fairly inconsistent with what our expectations were. And so age, certainly, age matters. Over 60% of counties have a greater than 10% difference in the count of the population 65 and older. As this chart shows, these happen to be color-coded by that size of population. Again, you can see the large number of, or the large share of counties with less than 5,000. Again, 22% overall in Colorado, but 20%. So almost all of them were at least 10% different in terms of that age distribution over time. If we want to look at age and sex change over the decades, so 2000 to 2010, we took a peek at the general fertility rate, so the number of births divided by females aged 15 to 44, so a nice big age group there. We had 5 counties change from increasing fertility to decreasing, where the largest county changed in 2000, 73.7, instead of to 75, down to 64. 3 went from decreasing fertility to increasing. And also, when we do different analyses across the state, we're oftentimes trying to locate where in the state a policy might be most impactful. Just looking at the top 10, so maybe the top 10 counties in Colorado with the highest fertility rate, only 5 of those remained in the top 10 when we used the DP data. So several potential impacts on the use of differential privacy. And just once again, at small geographies and population size, we've seen some very concerning results. Our concerns at the top here sort of definitely as related to the data, where we've got the privacy versus accuracy invariance, that population to household housing unit relationship. But then the credibility is a big one for us, and certainly that use of taxpayer dollars. So over the last several years, we and many other states have asked our legislatures for money to support that 2020 count. Not to mention the cost of $15.6 billion to conduct, and following the allocation of more than $675 billion to states based on the results. And so certainly a lot is at stake for local governments as we move forward. And I threw on some of our questions here: when and how will we see evidence of improvements? How is the method fixed or being fixed? And when or if it's fixed, that question about those invariants and privacy budgets and whether or not those are part of the fix. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Cindy. That was great, and a nice, both similar to and different than what Utah had to present for us. You also brought up the question of credibility, and there's something I was remiss about not saying at the very top, that I think for everyone on the phone and everyone around the country, the most important message we could have about the census is that everyone counts, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that everyone counts. NCSL has some resources on that. I just want to say that out loud. So we're talking about something that's in the weeds. The big message at this point in the year is let's get people out and counted. Let's see. With that, we've got lots of questions in the box. Before we get there, I do want to go on to a couple more slides, and we're going to figure that out in a minute here. And I'll let you know a couple of things here. We do have another webinar coming up on April 2nd. It'll be about redistricting data 101. Like this one, it will be free and open to the public, and I believe the registration is open for that at this point. And then we have a number of redistricting seminars coming up, and Michael Hawes will be at the next one. That's in Las Vegas in May, and we have one session dedicated just to talking with him about this. So we'll get 2 months later, where is the Bureau on differential privacy. And then I think with that, we are ready to shift to questions, and we have quite a number of them. Michael, I think they're pretty much all for you, if that's okay with you, and I'm going to take it from the top. You gave an example of re-identification takes in more information than what's on the PL file. Why can't the PL file alone not be adjusted while the rest of your file could be covered by the differential privacy?
So that's an excellent question. Thank you for whoever asked it. The issue there is even the PL file. The PL file is one of the most granular of our data products insofar as it's releasing detailed race information down to the block level. So it's absolutely easy to reconstruct individual level information just from the PL file. So there is still privacy risk there, and some of that information is sensitive, particularly for the race and ethnicity attributes. There is a need to apply protections to the PL file, and we've applied privacy protections to the PL file for the last couple censuses. So it's unfortunately Title 13 requires us to protect that information.
An example of you have two mandates, and they have some conflict. Next question is, I think, a yes/no one. Does the new approach only deal with total population, and every other published cell will be subject to noise? So the final parameters of the disclosure avoidance system are not going to be set until later in the year. So like what the overall privacy loss budget is going to be, what the allocation of that privacy loss budget will be, what the final list of invariants and constraints are, et cetera. Those are all going to be decided by our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee later in the year. That said, so the invariants that were included in the demonstration products included state population, so state total population was held invariant as enumerated, as were the number and type of group quarters facility at the block level and the number of housing units at the block level. So those were the only three invariants built into the demonstration products. It's likely those will continue for the final 2020 products, but again, the final decisions about the parameters for the system have not been decided. Okay. And then another question, will the PL94 data release be delayed by this new process?
No, so we are required by statute to release the PL94 data within 1 year of Census Day. So we will be releasing the redistricting data in accordance with that time frame.
Exactly right. Okay. If the algorithm causes the negative numbers, then how is that not biased? Can you talk about that a little bit? Otherwise, if it was properly working, would it not need that post-processing that you mentioned?
So this is where it's important to distinguish between the two kinds of noise. It's a great question, though. So for differential privacy to work, we need to inject noise into all of those calculations. And I say that it's statistically neutral noise because it's drawn from a distribution and centered on 0. And you will add noise just as often as you subtract it. So you might adjust up 1, you might adjust down 1. But if you take all of the noise that's injected and aggregate all of that noise together, it'll equal 0. The idea is that you're not introducing a systemic shift in any way. And from the differential privacy perspective, what's needed to protect privacy, that works, and it's unbiased. Unfortunately, the way that works is when you have particularly small counts and you're on the negative side of that distribution of noise, you end up with combination of attributes where you have negative numbers of people. So you'll have -2 white female age 37 in a particular block. Now, you can't have -2 people in our data products. So that requires the post-processing step of, okay, how do you take these now noisy measurements, these private noisy measurements, and reconcile them so that you have data that go out the door that look like the data products we're used to. And the post-processing is where we're seeing all of the systemic shifts that Jerry and Cindy pointed out. And I want to thank Jerry and Cindy for their great analyses. That's exactly the sort of feedback that we're looking for, and it's going to help us solve these issues. But so we need to, the post-processing is what is introducing those systemic shifts, and that is happening in observable patterns. And so that is the bias there. But the nice thing is that whereas the differential privacy noise is scalable through your privacy loss budget, and if you set the privacy loss budget high enough, you're going to spit out the raw data again. The post-processing is something that we can fix by doing the sorts of changes to the structure of the system that I mentioned before. And in fact, looking at the examples that Jerry and Cindy brought up, I think those are going to actually see remarkable improvements, if it's my prediction anyway, by the incorporation of the new geographic spline and the multi-phase processing. So these are exactly the sorts of things that we're identifying as problems from those demonstration products, which were a flawed interim product, I will admit that. And we're working towards finding a way to resolve that and mitigate that bias that we're noticing.
Okay, and we do have the question about how about keeping the negative numbers. Maybe you feel like you've just addressed that. You could keep them and publish them, be clear that there's negative noise, that there's noise. Could you speak to that, please?
So no, there's actually, there's a good scientific reason to publish the noisy measurements, because if researchers want to use census data as an input into their own estimations, their own models, etc., they'll actually get better results if they're able to include the raw differentially private measurements, because that can be, the error can actually be built into the models. So there's a good justification for why releasing those is a good idea. Again, final decisions about what is going to be released have not been made yet. So I can't say whether or not the Census Bureau will be releasing those, but there have been many who have suggested that we do.
Is there a way to know if differential privacy biases will affect home rule thresholds?
So that's an excellent question, and I wish I knew more about home rule thresholds. So that would be one that I would love to follow up with whoever asked that offline and get a better sense for what that use case is. And we can certainly build that into the set that we're looking at to evaluate the system and improve the priority use cases.
Jerry, do you know the answer to that about home rule? Some folks are in states with home rule and other folks are in states without it.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Then next question, Michael, is the Census Bureau still committed to releasing a new demonstration data set? And how do you do this when you do not publish the actual total population, which, while the traditional method does publish that? That wasn't very clear. Sorry about that.
So I'm not sure I followed the second part of the question, but I can certainly answer the first part. So releasing the demonstration products publicly is actually incredibly labor intensive. So right now we don't have any current plans to release another set, at least in the foreseeable future. But we understand that we need to be very transparent about what we're doing, and that we need to be providing information to our data users and all of you on what we're doing and how the improvements are making. So as I mentioned in my slides, we're developing this set of use case metrics. It's going to be a whole suite of essentially evaluations of the data quality. And then on an ongoing basis over the remainder of the year, we're going to be reporting out on those measures. So like it was X% in the 2010 demonstration products. After the March sprint, it was Y%. After the April sprint, it's Z%, et cetera, so that users can follow the key measures that they're most concerned about for their own particular use cases, and then see, okay, with this sprint, with these changes to the geographic hierarchy or these changes to the post-processing phases, the uses that I'm most interested in, those distortions have improved by this much. That is something that we are absolutely going to be doing, and you should stay tuned over the coming weeks to start seeing that.
And you had mentioned metrics before that you're developing those. Could you give us a timeline on those, please?
Sure. So I mentioned the Committee on National Statistics workshop back in December. Well, the part of that is we're doing a series of follow-up expert meetings. That workshop had kind of a wide array of data use stakeholder groups represented. And so we want to continue working with those different stakeholder groups. So we have a series of expert meetings that the National Academies are coordinating for us. The first of those is coming up later this month, and that's when we're going to agree on that set of what are the appropriate measures to reflect the most important use cases. And then we'll continue with those measures over the subsequent expert meetings and through our public statements and our blog posts.
And next point on that, you referred to these experts. We have a question, which is who determines the key measures? And perhaps the subtext there is how can people get involved if they want to, people who have that kind of expertise? Do you still need new people at the table?
So it's the National Academies that are deciding who those experts are. And I don't know if they have finalized the list yet or not. I don't know the answer to that right now. But as for the measures, so we have been, as we've been drafting kind of the proposed set of measures for the experts' consideration and comment, we've been using the feedback that we received from our advisory committees, the feedback we've gotten from our various partner groups, feedback from the Federal Register notice that we gave, and the feedback that's been submitted from the demonstration products. All of these analyses that we've been looking at, and we've been using those to identify, okay, what are the priority use cases for census data, whether they're statutory, regulatory, et cetera, what are their relative importance, and we're using those to prioritize kind of the improvements to the DAS. But yeah, in terms of input into those measures, we've been getting it from a variety of sources, and if you have suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
And will the household and population tables be consistent with each other in the next go-round?
So the person tables, I know for a fact the person tables are going to be consistent. In terms of consistency with the household tables, I'm not entirely sure what the question is getting at. We did identify those vacancy rates issues as a problem the moment we ran the demonstration products, and we've already been implementing solutions to that. As for other things, I know like the PL file will be completely internally consistent hierarchically. The DHC file will be as well. I don't know what was meant about the last bit of that question, so if you could clarify, I could maybe better answer that.
Jan, if you can put a clarification in the chat box, that would be great, and we'll get back to you after the fact. I have two more questions. We're well over the 1 hour point, so let's just do these last two and then wrap it up. Does the Laplace distribution include the possibility of adding zero noise in some cases? I have no idea what that means. I hope you do, Michael. Yeah,
absolutely. So you can think of the Laplace distribution, which is the frequency distribution from which we're pulling how much noise to add. For simplicity's sake, imagine it's just like a bell curve. And it's like a bell curve. It's not a bell curve, but think of it as a bell curve centered on 0. And like the greatest, for every statistic that we're pulling, we're going to pull a value for how much noise to add. the most likely value to pull would be the highest point of that distribution, the top of that bell. And that would be 0 because it's centered on 0. So yeah, the more often than not, we'll be pulling 0 or essentially 0 as the amount of noise to add. The farther away from 0 you get, meaning the more positive or negative noise, the less likely it is to get selected. Now, in like 1 in a million, you might get a very large value of noise that's getting pulled. That's one of the things that's driving the challenges with post-processing, with the zero cells of the histogram that I mentioned during my talk. But yeah, more often than not, you're going to be pulling an amount of noise that is 0 or essentially 0.
Great. We're going to take one more question. I do want to mention before we do that, that it would be great if everybody stays on the line so you can do that short survey of other topics you'd like to have us address. And here's the last question. Does the Bureau have a plan B in case it fails to find the sweet spot and to fully test the new processes before the deadline?
So the Census Bureau has a long history of releasing high quality data. And we know that our data users rely on us to be producing data that are fit for use. Our policymakers take that responsibility very seriously, and they're committed to making sure that what goes out the door in 2021 is of sufficient quality to meet our data users' needs, consistent with our legal obligations. So we're confident that we're going to be able to get the disclosure avoidance system to the point that it needs to be to meet those data use needs. But I mean, as with any census, there are always lots of plans and counter plans and contingencies, and so we are exploring possibilities in case additional changes need to be made to get the data up to that point. But we are confident that what goes out the door will be of high quality.
Well, Michael, one thing I want to say is that I think it's hard to get to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow because it keeps moving, and it's my opinion that census data just keeps getting better, even though there are things that have to be dealt with, like this disclosure avoidance that you're working so hard on. So thank you very much to Michael. Thank you to you, Cindy. Thank you to Jerry out there in Utah. This has been very informative for me. I really appreciate it. Stay on the line, and then feel free to be in communication with any of us at NCSL about this webinar or any other thing. So thanks very much. And I think we'll call it out a done deal. Thanks. Bye.